How did it feel to make this prediction and then have the world essentially not listen and not prepare?
Well, there's no good feeling that comes on something like this saying, I told you so. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. I just think back of could I have been more persuasive? But we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic.
How did you make such a prescient prediction? How did you know this was going to happen?
Well, there's a number of respiratory viruses, and from time to time one will come along that's very transmissive and causes some level of fatalities. Respiratory diseases are very scary because you're still walking around on a plane, a bus, when you're infectious. Unlike some other diseases like Ebola, where you're mostly in a hospital bed by the time the viral load infects other people.
Hey, so recently I got the chance to interview Bill Gates when his foundation's annual letter came out. I'll link to it in the description. And we talked about lots of things, including conspiracy theories and misinformation. But about the pandemic, I wanted to know if so many people could see this coming and the costs of prevention were relatively small, then why wasn't more done about it?
Well, there's some risks like earthquakes, where we see small earthquakes all the time, or, the history of war or fire or hurricanes. So you don't forget, these pandemics only come along so irregularly that being lulled into a sense of security where it probably won't be a problem in the next few years, why should we put money into that? You don't buy the insurance policy, basically. This one will help us understand it needs to be a priority.
I feel like humans have an issue, though, with fighting the last battle, potentially. So if we focus on pandemics now, and there isn't one, say, for another 100 years, what is the next disaster? What is the one that we're not prepared for?
Hello, my name's Professor Peter Collignon. I'm based at Canberra Hospital, but part of ANU Medical School. I'm a Professor of Infectious Diseases and Microbiology, and I'm here today with our guest, which is Associate Professor Gunnar Kurupiai, and we're going to talk about the issue of smallpox. Gunnar is at the John Curtin School of Medicine, and he is a researcher there in the position of Associate Professor looking at immunology and the viral immunology and immunopathogenesis in particular. And this issue has arisen because there's been a recent vote at the World Health Assembly on the issue of should all smallpox be destroyed. And currently, as far as we're aware, only two places are still storing smallpox, and that's the Russians and the Americans in the US. And they've kept them for reasons that we can talk about, but essentially it's to do with biological warfare. And but they had a moratorium to destroy that, but we understand they've not agreed to that, so the stocks are continuing. My own personal view is that we should destroy these stocks because I think they're there for germ warfare. I think it's a risk that we don't have to continue, but there are opposing views from an academic point of view as well, and that's where Gunnar is going to come in.
That's right, yeah. Thanks, Peter. Well, I certainly think that one day these stocks should be destroyed, but I do think that the reason why, especially some American researchers have requested for an extension of time to ensure that they complete the work that they first set out to do, and that's really to, and I think, the fact that smallpox has been eradicated would sound to someone as to why would we ever want to hold on to these stocks. The idea is really to ensure that we are able to develop new antivirals, which there are two available, but it's not quite there yet. It's not been approved by the FDA. We also need better diagnostic to diagnose smallpox, because at the moment there are some tests available, but it's still not as good as what the researchers would want them to be, especially to be employed out in the field. And the third is vaccines. So we've obviously managed to eradicate smallpox with a vaccine, but by today's standards, these vaccines that we utilize are considered to be quite dangerous in the sense that there's a high degree of adverse events. And so there's been a lot of research in the last decade or so on the generation of better, safer vaccines. But to date, we don't really have very good evidence that indicates that these vaccines are going to be effective. And all of this is I believe, is to ensure that in case there is an outbreak through some means of the smallpox virus being released, then at least we are prepared. And that's really the reason why the researchers in question want an extension of at least another 3 years.
Yeah, look, I guess I have a contrary view. I guess my view is that the only reason the predominant reason the Americans and Russians are keeping this is because they don't trust each other and somebody might release it as part of germ warfare. And it'd be very effective because people who are born after about 1980, hardly any of them will have been vaccinated. So
that's right.
It's fairly devastating. However, I also take the view that we've got the genetic sequence. We've got a very similar vaccine virus that I think we could, do experiments on. And if and when we actually had an outbreak of smallpox somebody's using as germ warfare, I mean, relatively quickly we'd have the virus because it's released out there. I mean, you look at other viruses, the Americans in particular are very good at getting into developing countries and getting hold of it. So I can't actually see the argument for keeping it because if we did need the virus itself to do any work on, we'd probably have it within 5 or 10 days of an outbreak because as soon as we know it, somebody would be there getting it. Now, we're not going to actually do, I would think, development on antivirals or a vaccine on the stocks we've got because the argument is there'll be a new strain that'll be genetically engineered that'll be different. So even if we had this worst case scenario happen because somebody, if you like, did the dirty, so to speak, to the world, I would still think we'd actually have to go from that point rather than really necessarily any advantage in keeping the stocks because what we know, I reckon we should be able to apply already and any new information would require the new virus, which we won't know until it's actually out there.
Yeah, no, these are very fair points. But I do think that I'm thinking in terms of what we really need to do in the next few years, and that is to get better antivirals because if we do not have antivirals that we know for sure that will work, then it's going to be a bit too late if there is an outbreak and the virus is out there.
They're moving equipment into their man camps. They haven't even missed a beat. Spotted Eagle, Tonka Inajiwi, which is Standing Stone, and I'm on Ihanktua territory in South Dakota. Up memories, probably in our DNA, about the smallpox blankets that were brought along this river that were along the Missouri River, and Mandan, Hidatsa, they were almost totally decimated. And so we have it in our DNA and our memory that this threat is coming again in the form of a virus. And so we're issuing our words and our statements and our bodies to say, get out of our land, go home.
Full text of a report claiming the US military used biological weapons during the Korean War will soon be up for auction. Kobe, Korea's largest art and antiques auction company, said Tuesday that filmmaker Im Jong-tae is selling the document after having acquired it in 2013 from a bookstore in England. The so-called Needham report contains photos, maps and testimony from American POWs that biological weapons developed from Japanese research were used during the war. It was filed in 1953 and was thought to have been discarded. US psychologist Jeffrey Kay posted a 64-page version of the 670-page document online in January.
This is EL-BLACKLIGHT. Why don't black people research like I'm researching? and then bring it forth to the public. It's all on YouTube. All you got to do is have the question you want to ask. Europeans decided to use Africans to replace the dying American Indian population. Now they're going to use artificial intelligence to replace the Africans. But somehow it's hard to knock us off, but they're trying. They're using bullets, biological warfare, psychological warfare, any means necessary to reduce the growth of the black man. But what's strange to me is that y'all don't want to talk about this. What happened to the hood researchers? Why aren't Sinetta and Umar Johnson talking about this disease, researching it? Why aren't the black doctors talking about it? Black scientists? This is part one. There's more to come.